It's now time to move on to decarbonizing what the world is made of. Our next speaker joining us is Cyril Dunant, materials scientist, research professor, University of Cambridge, and co-founder, Cambridge Electric Cement. With that, Cyril, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Lovely. Wonderful. I'll start by giving a little bit of context when I say decarbonizing everything. I don't mean everything. Merely about 80% of everything. Everything around you, in fact, that we humans manufacture tends to be steel and concrete. We produce, as humans, 80 billion tons of concrete every year. When you look at the impact, because in the end it's not the amounts that matter, it's the impact, the amount of CO2 produced in construction is about 50-50 steel and concrete, because steel is much more carbon intensive per mass. Therefore, in the future, we need to get rid of the emissions that are in those materials. This is a graph I've made, which I like a lot. It looks very complicated, but in fact, it's not very complicated. It tells a very powerful story. On the x-axis is GDP per capita, it's wealth, of many, many countries. In fact, all the countries I could take except a few island states. And you can see on the y-axis the cement consumption. And in fact, what you see is all these stories are aligned. Every country, when they developed, they consumed more and more cement, reached a peak, and went down. If I extract here India, because this is where I am, lucky me, and China, which has been put forward as the big development success, I can see two things. One, China has followed a slightly unusual development path, peaking before anybody else, whereas India has in fact developed, like every other country has developed before it, building the infrastructure, building the housing, building everything it needs for its people at, I would say, a normal rate. But because we have seen the story of so many countries, we can predict the future, because we know how development goes. And it goes like that. This is what we expect. In China, a collapse, and that has already started. There is excess cement capacity, but it is now being abandoned. And in India, by 2050, you should be an almost developed country reaching your peak cement consumption. But cement consumption is not cement impact, and this is what we need to fix. In steel, the story is the same. Rise, then fall. The peak in steel comes a bit after the peak in cement. Why? First, we need houses and roads. Then we need cars. And this is why we peak a bit later. And it is the same story. Here, I cannot predict what will happen for China, though I don't believe it is the high scenario. India, we heard yesterday that India would double its steel consumption. I think this is a slight underestimate, but it's about right. However, I also heard that this means there will be twice the amount of coking coal. That I don't believe, because steel is a recyclable material, and much scrap will be available by then. People tell you can decarbonize by using carbon capture. This is not true. Here this is the IEA database, every single carbon capture project. Those are the purple dots at the bottom. And this is the total world capacity in carbon capture today. The big black dot is the closure of one blast furnace that is now being replaced in the UK by an electric arc furnace. The same amount of carbon globally that is captured is the same thing as shutting down one blast furnace that burns coke and replacing it with a steel scrap recycling furnace. And this, by the way, this is the real capacity, not the claimed one. So circularity, recycling, and electrifying everything is the secret to be able to produce and to have the necessary buildings, the necessary infrastructure, without the environmental impact. That's a picture of a building being demolished. Commercial buildings live 30, 40 years. 50 years at the most, and then they're replaced because their shape is not adequate anymore. We need to recycle them. Currently, we recycle the steel. We need to recycle the cement too. Currently, that's the UK, but India would be the same. That's a linear production route. Limestone is being calcined in the kiln. That is, it's being produced at high temperature. Scrap steel is being recycled. You have rebars, concrete, and when a building is demolished, it becomes landfill, rubble. But in fact, you can recycle the steel, we know that, and I found that you can recycle the cement also. You can separate out the aggregates, and the cement can be recycled in the same electric arc furnace that recycled the steel. It can be reheated and reactivated. That means you can avoid the chemical emissions, because that has already happened, and you can avoid the heat emissions that are currently associated to the production of cement by electrification. Of course, you depend on clean energy, but the solar, the wind, the nuclear energies are there for us. And then you can close the loop to construction. Construction can be made entirely from recyclable materials, steel and cement. How is that possible? This is possible because, per chance, cement is lighter than steel. So in an electric arc furnace, cement floats on top of the steel as a slag. Steel recycling always produces a slag. It always floats on top. It just happens that the chemical composition of cement is compatible with steel making. Therefore, it is possible to produce in the same furnace that are currently being developed in India for steel refining and steel recycling, you could also be producing cement. And therefore, you can follow the same development path everybody has, building the infrastructure, building the housing, without the impact, because cement in the future can be produced electrically. These are some trials we did at pilot scale. This is a tiny, tiny furnace. It only melts 7 tons of steel, but it can produce something like 1 ton of cement at the same time. It is useless to innovate things that are not economically viable. And we have started this project of finding how to recycle the cement. And the first question we ask, okay, but can we do that at a price that is sensible? And the answer is yes. And the reason this is the case is not magic. It's not because it's a magical, incredible process. It's merely because part of the raw materials that you would have needed to recycle the steel anyway now get a double use. They're used for the recycling of the steel and the production of cement. And because of that, the overall production of steel and cement as a combined system can have less emission than the production of steel alone. Materials in construction, all materials tend to have prices that correspond to their energy intensity. Again, a complicated graph, but it's not so complicated. These are all the materials we use in construction: cement, concrete, timber. And we can see here that cement and timber, although cement is usually thought as an ecologically damaging material, is not so different from timber. You exchange a little bit of CO2 for a little bit of energy. You can see the difference between not recycled primary aluminium with, somewhere on here, recycled aluminium. Steel is the same thing. Recycling saves huge amount of energy. And if you add cement to this collection of materials you can recycle, you can create here, from the zone of cement, you can create recycled cement, the same way that for recycled aluminium, you move down there. Again, that means construction that provides the same service, but considerably lower impact over what it could have been. This is why we can see the future where there is development, where there's increase of well-being, that has the same volumes of material, but none of the impact, or at least much less. That's not all you have to do, of course, to improve construction. It's not just the material. Material is the easy thing in many ways. But because you are developing and building after much of the world has been built, that means you can take on the lessons of poor construction practice, poor design, and do it better. We know that by designing buildings better, you can save perhaps 20% of the embodied CO2 of your construction. You can make concrete better. Concrete is a bit like mixing cake. You can have so much water, so much cement, so much aggregates. By doing the better mix, you can have less concrete, less cement in the concrete. You can replace part of the concrete. Crucially, the steel can be made by recycling. That's the big EAFDRI deployment. That's the big bar. And then, today we know a little bit of recycling of cement, but we can recycle much more, such that tomorrow we can make the construction materials we do today with only a small fraction of the impact. And therefore, India can, like that, in the future, become wealthy, developed, and clean in a way that was never possible before. Thank you very much.